Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to see a full house this morning. Welcome to our trustees, Mr. President, friends of the university, alumni, students, colleagues. It's great to have you here at this important symposium, the Presidential Symposium on the Humanities. We all can attest to the importance of a university education. We all understand how in our personal and professional lives, for many of us, it has created the path of our successes. If I was to ask everyone in the room what elements of that education were most important, I would most certainly get a very wide and diverse set of experiences. That's because universities are multifaceted, they're complex, and that's important because they happen at a time in a person's life when they are most impressionable, a time in which people are searching for their lives and their future. And the opportunity to immerse oneself, to embed oneself in the learning experience is second to none. And those universities who capture that opportunity, who capitalize on that opportunity, are the ones that are fortunate enough to develop worldwide reputations. And I think that's true of AUB. We all understand the impact that it's had on this region and on this part of the world. I know personally my own liberal arts education and the study of the history of statistics and science generally paved the way for my initial career in scholarship and led me to business school and where I am now. The idea of the role of the humanities in an education is not new. You use a modern search tool such as Google and enter in the role of the humanities or the liberal arts, and you will find reams of opinions and discussions occurring at universities around the world, debating on the future and the impact of the humanities. I think we have very clear evidence that the humanities and the liberal arts have a major impact on this part of the world that's coming from AUB. The question we now have, and we're going to be proposing today as part of this panel, is the future of the humanities and, of course, the liberal arts in our education, because it does play a role. There is no accident that they've asked the dean of the business school to stand up here and talk about the humanities and introduce us to it. That's because I am a firm believer, as are some of my other professional colleagues that will be speaking today throughout this morning, that the humanities form the core of any education. In fact, they form the core of our disciplines. My discipline, our professional disciplines, would not exist today if they didn't form themselves from the very core of inquiry that humanities and the liberal arts are based on. So the humanities, as we'll hear today, runs deep in everything we do in life, in both our personal and professional worlds. I'm going to now turn over the morning to a number of moderators and panelists. There are going to be two panels this morning. One panel with two MCs. Not sure, I'm the MC. You told me not to make that mistake. Two moderators and the panelist. And we will then take a break, and there will be a second panel with its own moderators and discussion. I will let Lina Daouk and Doyle Avant, oh, you're over there, split up, make the introductions of the topic area and, of course, your panelists. Welcome again, and have a great morning with us.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you everyone for coming today. It's an absolute pleasure for us to be here. Doyle and I are very happy to be moderating this very interesting panel of the morning. We're going to start off with 4 panelists, and then we're going to invite another 2 groups as we go along. But we're starting today with a very, very interesting speaker, and Captain Rola Htate. I'm so proud to be introducing her today. She's the first and only female pilot in Lebanon. And I know the more... And I know the more I talk about her, the more I make her, she's so humble that she doesn't like people to talk so much about her. So, many of you must have read about her on social media or in many other places, but, reading her profile here today, as part of this panel, I read something extremely interesting that Rula is actually an AUB student, a graduate student studying philosophy now. So before you tell us about this, Rula, please, we want to know about your career, what got you into aviation and choosing this challenging career path that is typically not for women as well.
Good morning, everyone. Well, to go back to choosing the aviation career, well, it was all as a challenge when I was still a mathematics student in AUB.
Okay.
So it all started as a challenge back then.
So how did you decide? Do you have, pilots in the family, or how did you decide that you want to become a pilot?
No, no one in my family has ever flown a plane before. But as I told you, it was a challenge if women could fly planes or not. That's how it all started initially.
And do people always, when they see you at the airport, do they think you're a pilot, or they never assume that? They assume you're like a cabin crew, or?
Normally, even my grandmother, she still thinks that I'm a cabin crew. Until today, she doesn't believe it.
So after doing that, and you studied for quite a long, you worked as a pilot for quite a long time, but then you decided to join AUB again to do your master's. Yeah. So why philosophy in particular?
Well, if I go back for a few years ago, aviation was the center of my world. And I used to believe only building hours, flying professionally, and departing and arriving on time is what mattered to me. And I tried really hard to carve a name for myself in a masculine environment. And actually people started to congratulate me for being the first female pilot, and they called my career an achievement. And that's made me wonder, is being the first female pilot really an achievement? How? And also, how does it serve humanity? But then I started to go through some internal struggle where I was the first and youngest female pilot in the Middle East region. And I was the first and also youngest female president for an international organization. And I was married at a very young age, so my kids were at that time at an age where they were quite independent. And people were calling my career an achievement. So I started to think is this the purpose of my life? Have I really achieved everything? Did I reach the pinnacle of my life? And if that is the case, does this mean that the decline would follow soon? And that really terrified me, until one day, on one of my flights, I had an AUB employee as a passenger on the flight. And he asked to pay me a visit into the cockpit. And I was going through this internal struggle. I raised my concerns with this gentleman. I wish I know his name. And he was the one who advised me to go into philosophy. Initially, I started reading some philosophy books, but that made me raise more questions. Really, I had more concerns after that. And that was when I decided to go back into philosophy.
Fantastic. And having done that and being a student now, and did you start this year?
No, I've been studying for 3 years. Is it
3 years on a part-time basis?
Yes.
Okay, so how has it been? Has it changed, your view of the world and perception? How has it impacted people around you?
Well, actually, philosophy has really taught me that our dreams and our objectives in life are much bigger. It taught me how to think out of the box. And the important thing is it helped me to relate my career to bigger questions, like what is space, what is time, why are we here? And what is the relationship between language and reality? During every flight, I get to meet people who speak different languages. So what is meaning? So it really helped me to have bigger dreams and bigger objectives.
Wow, this is wonderful. So inspiring. And for the person who Rula met on the plane, if you are in the audience or you're going to see this later, please get in touch with her and probably with Bana as well. Thank you very much, Rula.
Thank you.
Terrific. Listening to your story makes me think that you're going from flying planes to flying with your mind, which you may not be the first woman in Lebanon to do that, but it's very important for all of us that you fly.
Thank you.
So that's good. And speaking of flying, over the winter break, I had the fortune of traveling in Morocco, and I was sitting having breakfast on this rooftop, and there was this beautiful bird pecking away at my croissant, and then it kind of flew to the next table and looked around, and it flew up to the roof, and for no particular reason flew down, into the courtyard and up and then back to the croissant. And I thought, and I was doing emails related to the symposium, and I thought, that's the humanities. You don't fly straight like that. You go this way and that way and around, and you look at all these things from many different angles, then you have another bite of your croissant and move on to the next thing. So, moving to our next thing, our next panelist is sitting at the bar stool right next to me. Dr. Bana Bashur is the chair of the Department of Philosophy. And one of the most important philosophical questions that she is wrestling with might be one that you'll find a bit surprising. Is the study of philosophy a completely irrelevant and frivolous way to spend one's valuable time? So, Bana, what's the verdict?
Okay, so that's why, I mean, teaching philosophy in the 21st century is really challenging because most people think that it's really irrelevant to their daily lives. So they think that it's irrelevant to daily lives, and this is why they think that it's something that involves armchair speculation of the most inconsequential type. And that's why the only time we use the term philosophy colloquially is to say things like خلاص بقى حاجة فلسفة. So in a technologically advanced world where our concerns are very practical, the image of Socrates in a toga going around asking about various definitions of virtue and justice seem of relevance only to those who are curious about historical trivia and are interested in engaging in this hobby. And since this is a legitimate concern, I'm hoping to convince you today that it's really not warranted and can easily be addressed. Philosophy, I think, and I think many of you may agree here, it gives you the tools for tackling any question, big or small. And so it is important for your daily lives. But I think more importantly and more fundamentally, philosophy allows us to understand ourselves, the world, what we value, and find meaning in our lives. So that's why, for me, philosophy is the most thrilling and exciting thing I had ever discovered. And this is why every time I teach new students, and we teach about 700 per semester, so not few, I get really excited to show them this wonderful thing that completely changed my life. And sometimes it changes theirs as well, and that's really, really exciting. But if I sit here and tell you this, then I'm not doing it any justice or you any favors. It'd be like telling you, look, this is the most sublime ice cream I've ever had, and then not offering you any, and that's like the worst thing a Lebanese person can do. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the generous Lebanese hostess, and while making my case that philosophy is relevant, I'm going to try to expose you to some philosophy. So I'll start with one of the basic questions that all of us ask, and we associate it with philosophy, and that's, how can I be happy? And of course, you don't have to be a philosopher or a philosophy student to ask this question. So how can I be happy? Well, one thing that philosophers have told us is that if you aim at happiness, you're not going to get it. And this is known as the hedonist paradox. So I'll try to illustrate with a simple example. Imagine going on a holiday, like you were. You're on vacation, and you say, look, what I want to do in this vacation is I want to enjoy myself. I don't want to waste time with going to museums, seeing the sights, hanging out with my friends, going to the beach. I don't want to do all of that. I just want to enjoy myself. So now, here's a secret I shouldn't have to tell you. You won't. You'll have a miserable time. And that's because it's precisely those things that you enjoy, these things that you value that make you enjoy it. If you aim only at enjoyment, you're not going to get it. And similarly in life, if your purpose is to have happiness, if that's your goal, then you're just not going to get it. Instead, what you should do is you should focus on things that give you meaning. And that, in turn, is going to actually make you happy. So this is, of course, this is a very sketchy presentation, but we don't have time to go into the details. So what's interesting is where this logic takes us, and it's really interesting that contemporary empirical research very recently has shown that to be the case, that people report to be happier when they aim at meaning rather than when they actually aim at happiness. So the question then becomes, well, how do you find meaning in your life? That's another cliche philosophical question. And the answer is actually both simple and illuminating. What you need to do is you need to recognize what it is that you value, and then ask yourself, is it something that's worth valuing? And to illustrate, I'm going to give you two examples. One of things that I don't think are valuable, and one of things that I do think are valuable. So one of my most disturbing experiences as a philosophy professor was when I was teaching an ethics class, and I asked my students, okay, so we were having a discussion like this, what do you guys value? And they said, money. And I explained to them, money is important, but it's something that's of instrumental value. It's the thing that can get you what it is that you value. It doesn't have value in and of itself. So what is it that you want it to get you? They looked at me very confused, and then one of them confidently answered, power. And I said, well, that works exactly the same way. Is there anything else that you value? And they just couldn't think beyond that. That was a very sad moment. But on a more positive note, one of the things that I think, a character trait that I think is extremely valuable is the character trait of curiosity. So anyone who values knowledge for its own sake thinks that it's important to have this character trait, to be curious. So the question then becomes, well, should we value knowledge for its own sake? And I'm sure most of you here think, yes, but let's humor those who don't, right? Someone who's very practically oriented, and very professionally oriented, that person doesn't think that knowledge for its own sake, it's only instrumental. Here I'll answer it by saying, look, what distinguishes us from animals is that animals only use knowledge to get to their practical concerns, to sustain themselves, to orient themselves in the world. But we're different because we get pleasure out of knowledge. These intellectual endeavors, we're cognitively very different. We're sophisticated. We get this pleasure out of just knowing things for their own sake. That's why we love reading a good book, watching a great movie, looking at a good piece of art, and even sometimes just solving a fantastic mathematical formula. We enjoy these things, and the more illuminating, the better, right? And so I hope that these couple of short comments have convinced you a little bit of why we value knowledge for its own sake, and really, none of you would be here at an institution for higher learning if you didn't. And if you are here, then you should think about that. So hopefully, in this short discussion, I've convinced you that philosophy is valuable because it gives us this meaning to life, but it also gives us this critical thinking skills that I've demonstrated, and those can be applied to these very important questions, how can I be happy, to the most trivial things. Harry Frankfurt, a famous philosopher, recently published a book distinguishing between lying and bullshitting. And, we do things like that sometimes. So, but do me a solid. Next time someone tells you, ما تتفلسف, tell them it helps you live a good life. Thanks.
I feel like I found happiness just these last few minutes.
Bana, indeed, philosophy, it teaches us a lot about the meaning of so many things around us, and as you said, also the meaning of time and space that, Jennifer here keeps on reinstating the meaning of time to me. But, I haven't met any parents who actually advise their kids to study philosophy at university. Go, my son, study philosophy, you will enjoy that. But then we have here with us Elsa, who not only decided to study philosophy as an undergraduate student, but also as a pre-med student. And now she's a third-year medical student at AUB, at the Faculty of Medicine. So has it always been your plan to study philosophy and then do this very interesting and unique shift to,
No, not at all,
setting a new trend?
No. I first was a biology student when I came to AUB, and my goal was mainly to get into medical school. I had no intention to go into philosophy, but as a requirement in order to graduate, I had to take like 2 to 4 humanities. And I took one civilization studies class in my second semester, and it was enough for me to be completely seduced. I was sold. And my parents, they weren't that thrilled about it because they thought I would just go with philosophy. Yeah. But I transferred and I still went into med school as was planned. And the reason why I transferred is because in a class in humanities, it's a very different strategy of learning. Like instead of being on the other side of an auditorium where you receive information and you receive knowledge, passively, in a humanities class, you're actually actively involved in the thinking and even like creating, sharing thoughts, and you're part of the learning process. So I was seduced, and I'm really happy I got my BA in philosophy, actually.
Wow, that's fantastic. And do you think that you benefited from the courses that you've taken? Has they benefited your medical education? Are they helping you today?
Yeah, they surely did. And that's exactly what's nice about humanities, because no matter where you go, they will help you. We tend, especially here in Lebanon, to classify like humanities on one hand and maybe business, science, or medicine on another hand as mutually exclusive fields of studies. Like you either go into one or the other. You either have a head for business or you have a head for literature, let's say. But it's really not the case. And apart from creating opportunities on their own, the humanities have actually historically always been flavoring all the other educational fields in a way. Because if personally, if I look back at my 3 undergraduate years, I grew more than I ever did. Like in these 3 years, I grew more than I had in 10 years maybe.
Wow,
just
that's
by,
amazing.
yeah.
So do you feel like studying philosophy has had an impact on you personally
Yeah.
and perhaps you as a future physician
Yeah,
as well?
of course it did. And as a matter of fact, the medicine and philosophy are actually connected, and the medical school curriculum includes today like mandatory courses in literature, art, and ethics, because every student should be exposed to these and learn about the expansive range of human emotions and affect and aspirations. And other than this, it personally helped me I put philosophy as part of my identity, and more so than a white coat will ever be, because even I go to AUB MC, which is definitely...
Watch out not to upset the doctors in the...
No, not at all. I was going to say, which is actually the best university, the best medical college in the Middle East, and a very well-established college worldwide. And it will, with no doubt, make me the best doctor I could dream to be. But it is actually my BA in philosophy that made me a better person. Like, it changed me as me. Like, it made me better. And because this is what matters at the end for me. And ultimately, it's through humanistic studies that you learn how to deal with the complexity of the human experience and to make sense out of your life and goals. And because you can be great at doing business or you can be great at diagnosing patients, but at the end of the day, if you lack insight into human culture, or if you lack empathy towards your patients, your employees, and even if you lack integrity or you don't have a moral compass, personally, I still think you have a very long way to go to be successful. And as Professor Bana said, it's not about what you have materialistically. It's not about the goods you have personally. And I have only my philosophy BA to thank for teaching me the distinction.
I couldn't agree more with you, Elsa. And in fact, this is part of the research that I do. I look at the competencies and the characteristics of physicians that are non-clinical. What else does a person need to have and possess in order to be an excellent physician? And something that I'm really loving about this symposium is that I already have like 3-4 connections for future research that I'm going to be doing with some of the panelists here. Thank you very much, Elsa.
Thank you.
Terrific. So now I'd like to introduce Mahmoud Yunus. Mahmoud started out as a biology major at NDU, but then had changed life paths a bit and went on to earn an MA in philosophy from AUB in 2016. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the road that led you from neuroscience to philosophy and some of the surprises and rewards of that journey. And also, was the move between those two fields really a change in path at all?
Thank you, Don. I think Elsa made much by way of giving an answer to this. I don't think there is a discrepancy or, distinctions achieve something for us, but they presuppose a certain continuity. I don't think that neuroscience, biology, philosophy are that desperate. Of course, to keep them in different compartments is useful, but we have to be aware that these compartments are part of the same house. In 2005, when I was doing my first master's degree in neuroscience in Germany, there was a very, very important book by probably the most celebrated neuroscientist at the time, Michael Gazzaniga, The Moral Brain. And it's really it's completely amateurish. And it claims to be giving us arguments from neuroscience to solve moral dilemmas, but neuroscience is there only to intimidate. And I thought that this is very problematic. And you see this, that this is more of a trend. And people who tend to exclude one aspect of this whole field tend to have a tendency to hegemonize. And I think that this is improper And this was one central motivation of mine. I think there is a certain kind of, well-roundedness which can only obtain when you have a proper disposition to observe and appreciate human things, human institutions. And science, when it is severed from the rest of this field, does not properly cater for this. And I think, to make a qualification, it is not the only possible way. It's an improper way of handling science in its relationship to the humanities, but there is definitely a proper way, which I could say something about.
Please do.
If you take another psychologist or neurologist from a much earlier period, William James, who established the psychology lab at Harvard and then became a philosophy chair there, you see that he's dealing with issues which are of much value to human beings, sensitive issues, religion, morality, with deploying state-of-the-art science. But then his approach definitely takes into consideration the whole depth of the field. It doesn't exclude certain things that we human beings tend to appreciate or find and dismissive them summarily. I think his work, which I'm currently translating into Arabic, is quite valuable, and you would see a tendency to relegate it to the 19th century. It is from outside of the humanities and the humanities curriculum that people go back to William James and use people like William James, who have a much broader experience, to tackle questions at the interface between science and philosophy nowadays. I think that's very valuable. And this is the kind of mode, I'm not suggesting to go all the way to polymathesis, but people should have a certain appreciation of literature, of history, and a liberal arts curriculum caters for that. So people don't have to be specialists in a crass sense. I think so.
It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. Thank you.
So please join us in thanking all the members of our first panel for speaking with us today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Gustave Lançon said it best when describing Voltaire. He said, in a world of bureaucrats, engineers, and producers, Voltaire is a necessary philosopher. The exact same phrase can be applied here. In a world of doctors, plastic surgeons, and civil engineers, curiosity is the necessary agitator. The world we have today was not built on the ideas of one or even two fields. It was the beautiful, accidental, and sometimes even weird synthesis of completely unrelated schools of thought. It was the brainchild of curious, fertile minds. It is those kinds of minds that bring about drastic and lasting changes, because it takes that kind of person to bring about change.
The liberal arts reminds us of what is timeless. Our connections to each other are most strongly expressed in prose and in poetry, in music and in dance, in the social sciences of how we relate to each other, and in the natural sciences of discovery and healing. These are the arts and tools which make, if I may paraphrase Howard Bliss, doctors, pharmacists, merchants, preachers, teachers, lawyers, editors, statespeople, poets who are human and can find the humanity in others.
So welcome to the second group of speakers or panelists for today. I'm going to start with Maximilian Motet. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. As you saw part of Maximilian's speech here earlier in the video, Maximilian is the winner of the prestigious Founders Day essay contest. And everyone, I've heard so much about him and about his speech before even being invited to the symposium, and I'm very happy to have him here today. Welcome, Maximilian. So please, if we can start by, I heard and from you earlier that you have engineering runs in the family and that you're always destined to become an engineer. But that along the way you kind of like diverted a little bit and found yourself in other places. Can you please tell us about this?
Okay, well, first I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and it's intimidating to be here myself because I feel as I'm the youngest one here I'm an undergraduate. I haven't even selected my major yet officially.
There's only a couple of years between me and you, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And so, well, I have probably the least career experience, certainly, here, so there's a lot to learn. So like you said, yeah, my dad studied as an engineer, and from the youngest age, and from watching Iron Man, I was told myself I would be an engineer, I would do the same, and that's where I was heading. And when I was in Belgium, for example, it was the French system, as some of you know, most of you know maybe. When you want to go into engineering, you have a choice of subjects you can take. You usually end up going in sciences, and you take science until you become an engineer. So that was the path that was laid out for me. But I noticed, or my teacher kind of forced me to explore different options. One of these options was studying Latin and Greek, old languages that no one speaks anymore, and I had no idea why I would ever take these courses. But like Bana said earlier, I think unconsciously I was looking for a motive, a reason to do something interesting. I hadn't finished or was even close to finishing what there is to learn in the sciences, but I felt like there was a unique opportunity in learning such an exotic languages and cultures that come with Latin and Greek. I'd heard all the myths, the legends, Zeus, Icarus, Ovid, and we even got to translate most of his texts from Latin to French. And that opportunity really changed the entire way I think. Sure, nowadays I remember nothing of Latin, even less of Greek. I can read it, but I don't know what I'm reading. But what stayed with me is the critical thinking needed to translate any text. It's not you memorize a word, you see it, you translate it, maybe add some declinations. No, it's critically thinking as to what the author would have wanted to say, how it would translate today, and this kind of thinking affects everything I do today. I don't just go into an idea or a path going, okay, these are the steps, this is what you do, 1, 2, 3, and you're done. Sure, there are the steps, and you're better off following them most of the time, but sometimes you can go off the path and use your creativity and the knowledge you've gathered from every single discipline you've ever been curious about and join it together to oftentimes come up with a better answer, or even the same answer, but you yourself understand it better. And that's what I think humanities really does when you're developing yourself as a person. And that's the effect I've noticed in my short time here.
Wow, that's really interesting. And so has this diverted you away from engineering?
Not at all, no.
No? Professor Harajli is happy.
I'm still thinking of going into engineering because I believe in today's age we do need to have a technical knowledge of the world. But from our own standpoint, from our own initiative, we also need to be able to step away from the mass, I would say, who are going into technical knowledge and trying to find out what else we can learn. There's the entire business world you can learn in class. You can learn by actually starting a business, for example. Then there's maybe the artistic side of things. You can do, public speaking, which I'd say is more artistic. There's graphic design, which I do, which again it's very different, but it all comes together to make a whole person. Not someone with lopsided knowledge, but someone who can engage in any sort of conversation and find any sort of a conversation and person interesting. And that's what I'm going for, I guess.
Well, there's also room for you to join the business school. Don't forget that option. So do you think it's going to, the humanities that you've been exposed to and all this experience is going to make you a different or a better engineer in the future?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said in the speech, I was saying how a doctor might find benefits in learning about Polynesian cultures or something like that. But along those lines, and I still think that's true. And as an engineer, if I learn as much as I can outside of engineering, either it won't help directly if I learn about maybe, I don't know, I really don't know. But if I learn about something completely different, it might not ever help me in engineering directly. But the extra breadth of knowledge might influence the links I make between unrelated disciplines. I might consider finding a way to combine two things into one and reach a better solution. And I think that's how humanities really helps me.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Maximilian. And I look forward to seeing you, even if you're going to end up only in engineering. I'm pretty sure you're going to be taking some courses in business, and hopefully I'll be seeing you in one of my classes.
I'm already looking towards philosophy.
I'm actually going to nudge you towards a theater course, because I was really knocked out by your speech, and for someone who says that he's nervous and intimidated, you look cool, calm, and collected. So I'm sure that Sahara Saf will be very happy to have you in one of her classes. Excuse me. Now, I'm very happy to introduce a friend and colleague, the chair of the Department of English, Sonia Maharatasi. And I'm not just saying this because I work here in the department, but these are very exciting times for the department in terms of the growth and evolution of the program, all the things that we're offering, even compared to just a few years ago. There's been a lot of very exciting changes happening. So looking at the remarkable array of courses that we offer, it would almost take less time to say what we don't do, but we've got some time. So give us a picture of what's happening in the English department.
Sure. Thank you very much, Doyle. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So the Department of English really is a hub for language and literature studies, for interdisciplinary inquiry and outreach. So in addition to offering BA and MA degrees in language and literature, that's probably what you expect us to do, we have a number of minors, and these are in creative writing, in gender studies, in translation together with the Arabic department, in film and visual culture together with media studies, in theater together with fine arts and art history and the civilization studies program, and an additional MA in rhetoric and composition is in the making. It's pending approval. It is designed to further professionalize our communication skills program and the teaching of academic writing in English across AUB, and aspires to meet a growing demand for instructors in composition as the higher education sector continues to grow regionally. The department has also played a key role in developing new initiatives across AUB, such as the theater initiatives, the gender and women's studies initiatives, and digital humanities. We are probably the biggest department in the humanities as regards our faculty and our students. Each semester we teach almost 3,000 students from all over AUB. We are very proud to have about 50 undergraduates of our own who major in either language or literature, and between 40 and 50 graduate students, and this certainly in addition to other students who choose to do one of our minors.
So the conventional thinking in Lebanon and in America as well is that you'd have to be crazy to major in English, because it pretty much guarantees you a long career of being overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated. So does that pretty much describe the life waiting for or English majors once they graduate?
Not for our graduates. So our graduates, so some of our students, they continue their studies at top universities abroad. We just started together with the English Student Society an alumni speaker series. And the first speaker, she's now an assistant professor at the University of Chicago. So they get scholarships, but to finish, to do their PhDs abroad, but they also really get into very good positions, right, in academia. Others pursue careers in the educational and cultural sectors, in publishing, in management, in marketing, in a lot of different fields. What makes English majors valuable to their employers is their ability to use language, their critical thinking, their powers of research, analysis, and argument, and their wide knowledge of culture. It's important to point out that the Department of English relates to global Englishes, so from global Shakespeare to African literature and Hindi film. Yes, we do all that. And it's enriched by the multilingual background of our international faculty and students. Our literature program includes a growing comparative world literature component that draws on AUB's unique location and looks in all directions, so west, east, north, south. The department offers a window to the world and opens new horizons, grounded in language and literature studies. Literature understood as the most heightened example we have of words in action, as Edward Said says in The Return to Philology. As such, the Department of English, and I think the humanities broadly, cannot be excluded from disciplines that impinge on life or death issues.
Terrific. No, it's great. It's very exciting what's going on. It's doing a lot of different things, but there does seem to be a logic that pulls it all together into an integrated piece. So great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Doyle, thank you, Sonia. And Doyle, we don't need to go very far to see how well the graduates of the English department are doing. We have a graduate here who has a BA and a master's degree from the English department, and who has a foot in academia and in publishing as well. So please tell us, is your life as miserable as Doyle described it would be?
Well, thanks, Ina. Actually, I'll start back from the beginning. My life was a little bit miserable at one point because, as most Lebanese students know, your final year of high school is a bit difficult, especially if you have any desire to pursue knowledge or a career in a non-technical field like I had. And I came from a very quintessential family of engineers and lawyers and bankers and pharmacists. And I was innocent myself in high school, but then when I was persistent and I decided to go on for the BA in English, and I think I didn't know it at the time, but I was interested in the question of what makes you a better human than a specialized technician in any field or other. And then when I decided to continue my MA at AUB at the same institution, some people said I was committing career suicide, but I knew that I wanted to be part of the transformation that was going on in our department under Sonia, and especially because our MA program allows you the freedom to really specialize further in an area of study. And you do that through tutorials, which I recommend our graduate students to do if they have the chance, and to ask questions and pursue that line of thought further. And so, no, I think now where I am, I'm very, very not miserable. It's good.
So you're a part-time instructor in the English department. You teach English here at AUB, but you're the editor of Turning Point.
Right.
Can you please tell us a little bit about your work there?
Definitely. So for me, I wanted to have one foot in the commercial world and one in academia because Turning Point for me was an access point really to maybe have this conversation, which is what the humanities is all about, I think. In one word, it's about having conversations, to actually bring more and more people in from the external world, from everyday life, into this conversation that we're having. And so one of the things that we're doing right now at Turning Point is putting together an anthology of Arab women's writing about what it means to be an Arab woman in the 21st century. And I think that without having that sort of grounding in the humanities, I would not have been able to realize that position of power that I have at Turning Point, or being able to do that. And so that kind of grew organically out of my humanities education. But on the flip side, I think also academically, being part of the humanities allowed me to enter into conversations across culture, like, for example, being part of the Institute for World Literature. It made me realize that scholars and humanists around the world are talking about this crisis that we're facing in the humanities, but I think that it's not exclusive to the humanities. Everyone in every single professional or technical field is in crisis, but there's room for conversation, and I think that's really what's going to salvage us as human beings in the long run. You're right.
Terrific. It's, seeing Dima here makes me realize that time is passing, because just the other day, this 19-year-old, kind of shy young woman showed up at my creative writing class.
Still shy.
I blinked my eyes, and now she works here. So I'm hoping that if I keep blinking my eyes enough, that one day I'll open them up and she'll be the first woman president of Lebanon, which will be a very good day for AUB Humanities, indeed. On that note, please join me in thanking us. In helping. Sorry. Wait.
may.
Yes, please.
If I may, I wanted to share one more story with you from one of our new graduate students. So this is a graduate student who's a judge, and now she chose to do an MA in literature. So she was in my 301, which is the introduction to our graduate program, and was looking for, a research topic, something, that she could focus on, more in the long run. And then I asked her, so you're a judge, why don't you do something on literature and law? So she started researching the topic and found certainly there's this huge interdisciplinary field on literature and law, and she came across texts from Plato's Apology to Joyce Finnegan's Wake, Kafka's The Trial, Camus' The Stranger, Abderrahman Munif, East of the Mediterranean, and I think you can think of many more texts that deal with legal issues, right? And this reminded me of my own trajectory, so I'd like to very briefly share that as well, because I studied 2 years of law before taking all my courage together and transferring to comparative literature. And believe me, at that time, at the Free University of Berlin, it was more difficult to get into comparative literature than it was to get into law. You had to know Latin and a number of other languages, and you had to have very high grades. And what I wanted to point out, also I was getting good grades in law. Our students, many of them transfer from business, from biology, from other disciplines, and they do that because they are not exposed really to the richness of the humanities during their school years. So these first years are really key for them to discover that there's all this wealth out there, right? And they do that really by choice. It's not that they're not doing well in engineering or in biology. Sometimes they are doing very well, but maybe they're not really passionate about it. And I think we have to be passionate about what we do to really excel, right? So I only found out yesterday, actually, that the student I just mentioned, she's the sister of our pilot of Rola Hotel. So this is Rasha, who's also in the audience. And I wanted to share this example because I think it shows us that literature really builds bridges and connects to other fields of knowledge. So be it literature and law, be it literature and medicine, health, there's also a growing field out there, be it literature and the visual arts. So really literature allows you, it opens up to so many possibilities and builds really bridges and connections. Thank you.
This dynamic of why students transfer into English or just start out majoring in English in the first place, it makes our life as English professors easier because most of the students are there because they want to be. No one's in there going, my parents are making me major in English. I want to be a doctor, but they're making me study Faulkner. So it makes our life a little easier. So on that easy note, let's thank this group here. I'm sorry, I forgot about Great. For our last but not least group of the morning, we're going to start with Mario Hoat. Mario started out his undergraduate studies pursuing a degree in mechanical engineering before Mario started out his undergraduate career pursuing a degree in mechanical engineering before having a change of heart and transferring to English, where he just earned his BA in December. So he's been out in the world for all of 27 or 28 days and doing fine. So Mario, tell us about how you came to your senses and came to English. And if you could answer the one question that will be on everyone's mind, did your parents go through the roof when you told them you were changing majors?
Thank you for having me. First of all, as you can imagine, this change of heart made for some very awkward conversation at the dinner table, first from my parents, then from my extended family, then from acquaintances, and it keeps rippling on. But I couldn't be more satisfied with my decision. So at first, I was also, like many young, dashing Lebanese boys, I was predestined to be an engineer. And I enrolled in the engineering program, and I actually spent 2 years in it. But I'm also a musician, and I worked in the visual arts and special effects, and I worked in a lot of different creative fields. And I was convinced that this is the way it should be. You should pursue a very serious professional career, and then you would have your trivial stuff on the side. But honestly, I wasn't satisfied with this separation. And I started picking some courses to quell this existential thirst and you're supposed to be miserable. And these courses happened to be in the English department. And what started out as a simple vanity choice, at least as it was presented to me, turned out to be a watershed moment for me. And I ended up transferring into the English literature department. And lo and behold, actually, and contrary to what my parents thought, the biggest concern my parents had was how I was going to be able to feed myself with this career choice. And obviously, I like to feed myself a lot. But thankfully, and I'm grateful to that, after I did the switch, I had an explosion of career opportunities. So as you can see here, I was invited. I attended the Leipzig Summer School for Digital Humanities, and I switched from stage to stage, and I got a ton of research opportunities. I'm on the organizing committee of the Digital Humanities Institute of Beirut, which is the biggest of its kind in the Middle East. And it will be held at AUB in March, so if you want, you can enroll, and I'll be giving a class.
I have an important question to ask here. What is digital humanities?
This is another very interesting point I keep after getting. Why did you decide to starve yourself? What is digital humanities? So digital humanities is, I think it beautifully encompasses what the humanities as a whole represent. It's on the one hand, it shows the interdisciplinarity of the humanities. As you have seen with the panelists we have had, none of them pursue, or at least all of them had some kind of combination of interest. And I think it's one of it shows the openness of the humanities. So it's an interdisciplinary approach to computational and humanities questions. So what I'm going to give you an example of a project I'm working on.
Okay.
So it's called the macro analysis of books published in Beirut. So what I did is I analyzed every single book published in Beirut from the 1800s until now. This amounts to roughly around 80,000 books. As any well-versed humanist would say, reading 80,000 books would be a very hard thing to do if you want to write a paper on that.
You need a lifetime or two for that.
Yeah, a couple more maybe. So what I did is that I wrote computer software, I use AI, I use neural networks to be able to parse through this amount of information, but to parse through it with a humanistically informed way. So it's not a simple matter of quantizing them, of quantifying them into numbers, but you also need to be informed of all the humanistic principles which the department has inculcated on me. And I think the thing I would like to focus on is that this synergy between, so we talked a lot about how the humanities are seen as an archaic venture. So you have technology, and if you want to see why you exist, then you would ask yourself. But I don't see them as this separate. I think it's all the fields can be technologically enhanced, and the humanities, out of all the fields, I think it stands to gain the most out of this further technologically and digitally driven endeavor.
Oh, that's extremely interesting.
Terrific. I love how Mario said that once he switched into English, he said that's when all the opportunities and work started to come in. It makes me think that we should tell Sonia to change the way we promote the English department. English, where the money is. And maybe in future generations, Lebanese parents will force their kids to major in English. So great. Thank you, Mario. Terrific. Thank you. So the video that we watched during the last interlude was an excerpt from King Lear, which was a new Arabic translation that had its premiere production at the Theater Al Medina, which is just down the street on Hamra, a few blocks from here. This was part of the AUB Theater Initiative and another successful collaboration between the producer, Robert Myers, who's a professor in English, and Sahar Asaf, who co-directed and also played in the production Cordelia?
Yes.
She was Cordelia, okay. Sahar, and also this is yet another sort of very positive collaboration, between people in the English department and in fine arts, which is, a sign that in the humanities, these departments are not just islands existing, that there's work happening between them, between fine arts and media studies, between English and media studies. So this is a very positive development that's been happening in the last few years at AUB. Sahar heads up, by the way, Sahar is also the Wizard of Oz behind everything that you're seeing today, so thank you for that. Sahar heads up the theater program in the Department of Fine Arts and Art History, which for me is one of the most dynamic and exciting departments at AUB today. And it just so happens that the Chair of Fine Arts and Art History and the head of AUB Music, Dr. Thomas Kim, has joined me at the round table. So how is it as a musician to be chair of the Department of Fine Arts and Art History?
Well, Fine Arts and Art History has both studio art, art history, as well as music and theater. And it is a joy to be in this department. I'm inspired every day by my colleagues. Like other humanities programs, we participate in and organize conferences and symposia. We write scholarly articles and books. We do innovative research. But we also conduct concerts, we direct plays, we curate exhibitions, and we produce works of art that are well received around the world. This last year, Frieze magazine, called the Arab Nude Exhibition, co-curated by our Octavian Echenieu, quotes, "One of the most important shows of modern art I have ever seen in the Middle East." And this is Frieze magazine, for those of you who don't know, is one of the most respected journals in modern art. The New York Times, who I'm sure you all know, said that this recent performance, that the AUB Choir and Choral Society, quote, "sing with enthusiasm and disciplined energy," and they called this performance a downright dandy. Which is lovely. I'm very pleased with these. But yeah, it's nice to get those adjectives from the New York Times to throw in your CV. But more importantly than getting good reviews is that we are doing work at a very high level all over faculty, which translates to our teaching, because all of these activities, both creative as well as scholarly, they're based on the principle that art describes, defines, and deepens human experience. We believe that the study of art, theater, and music is fundamental in the study of the liberal arts. We're constantly striving to improve our curriculum. Over the last several years, we completely revised the undergraduate majors in studio art and art history. We are on the cusp of inaugurating a new master's program in art history and curatorship, the first of its kind in the Middle East. We're also developing plans for new majors in music and theater. Once launched, these will be the only such majors within a liberal arts context in the region.
So what do your students do? What do they go on to do? Are there any success stories you have that you'd like to share?
We have many success stories. This department is perhaps the youngest, or one of the youngest. Actually, I think it is the youngest department at AUB. Media Studies was founded later, but that's part of an older department. But Fine Arts and Art History was founded very recently, I believe within the last 8-9 years. It's very young. We've had many of our students go into graduate study as well as become working artists, musicians, scholars, curators, and directors of galleries. One of our juniors, Karima Al-Jalani, has her work currently on exhibit at the Sursak Museum. Another former student, Maya Sadeh, won a $15,000 scholarship while she was an undergraduate in studio arts from the Association for the Promotion and Exhibition of the Arts in Lebanon. Maya made a very strong impression on me. She has a moderately strong stutter and her senior project was an installation called I Stutter, which examined her feelings about this condition, ranging from fear to anger and finally to acceptance. I was thoroughly moved by this work. Not only was I able to see stuttering from a totally different perspective, I was able to personalize it, to relate it to many different experiences that me, my family, and my friends have gone through. This is one of the beauties of arts, its ability to bring greater understanding to each other.
So, I think there's something very interesting and exciting happening at AUB, because there was a perception and perhaps a reality 10 years ago that though this might be the preeminent institution certainly in the country and the region, that arts-wise, we'd let LAU take care of theater and maybe AUB visual arts and AUST film and I think there's a move to not only have programs in those areas, but strong programs and hopefully one day the best programs in the country. And President Khoury has spoken on several occasions about his support for music, theater, and the visual arts here at AUB. And I've certainly seen the university making great leaps in the past few years. So how do you feel about where we are and where we're going arts-wise?
Well, I'm very grateful to President Khoury's commitment to the arts. I think that we are, like I said, we are on the cusp of launching our new master's program, and new programs are in the works. Art programs are not inexpensive, and to have the support from the administration is particularly crucial as we continue to evolve and expand over the coming years.
So, as someone who teaches creative writing and film production, one of the reasons I find FAH so compelling is that not only are you teaching humanities, but you're also making the humanities. You're teaching and creating a new generation of Lebanese music, art, and theater. So all of which is happening within a liberal arts context here. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how this is different from the training one would get at a traditional, more specialized arts institute.
Yeah, this is very important. You mentioned LAU. LAU is a comprehensive university, which many think, which has a large liberal arts component, but their arts major is not part of the liberal arts component. It's a Bachelor of Fine Art. It's totally different. Art describes, I said this before, art describes, defines, and deepens human experience. If this is true, then the study of art must be concurrent with the study of the human experience. For the artist to have, to be able to say anything meaningful, he or she must have something to say. This can be philosophical or political. It could be a reflection of a work of literature or a concept in astrophysics. Artists and those who study in art must have a broad-based education that includes many fields. And this also benefits, art within a liberal context, also benefits those who are in other fields who take art as an elective. Art is a non-verbal way of communication. Learning how to create art will give those in other fields the tools to allow for greater communication to a wider audience. It will allow them to, quote, speak and to understand from a totally different point of view. We've already heard many stories of how humanities helps those who are in different fields, how the medical school, through the medical humanities program, is requiring that all medical students study art. I suggest that the act of creating art is ultimately one of the principal ways of creating people who lead fulfilling and productive lives regardless of their profession. Khalas.
Great.
Thank you, Tom. I would like to also introduce our last speaker for panel one, Ms. Rana Nasiruddin. Rana is a graduate of AUB and of Oxford in art history. This is another field that is a little bit, unlikely for people to focus on, especially considering that Lebanon, with the war and everything that happened, we diverted a little bit away from art and art appreciation. So please tell us a little bit about you and your experience studying art history?
Well, first off, I'd like to address what you said before about Lebanon really needing an art history program, or how art history fits within the general context of whatever events happened in the country. Now, art and architecture have always been one of the main markers of the success of a civilization. They serve as a legacy, as a form of self-preservation. So, for example, when we think of Egypt, we think of the pyramids, we think of hieroglyphs. When we think of Italy, we think Sistine Chapel, Duomo, etc. Or in more contemporary sense, when you think of Chicago, you might think of Anish Kapoor's Cloud Gate. They've all become symbols of representing the people, the history, and as a form of national identity. Now, Lebanon is a relatively new country, and we've just started trying to define our national identity through the arts. And we've seen this throughout the Middle East. I mean, there are huge projects going around, a lot of institutions, biennials, museums, art fairs that are sprouting out throughout the Middle East. And specifically in Abu Dhabi, for example, we have the Guggenheim and the Louvre opening, as you can see in the second picture here. But the major flaw in such institutions is that the Louvre and Guggenheim, they've already established their museum, collecting, and art historical traditions. And what's going on in Abu Dhabi is that they are importing these traditions and putting it in a completely different context. And this is a flaw that I really hope won't happen in Lebanon. Lebanon has a huge artistic production with artists exhibiting throughout the world, placed in major collections. And we have really amazing grassroots and non-for-profit institutions like Ashkal Alwan, 98 Weeks, Arab Image Foundation, Maqam. But until recently, we don't have a single space for the exhibition of modern art, not a reference, a book, or anything of that sort. So it's at this point that we need art historians more than ever to document, identify, and rationalize what happened in the past, and basically how we got here right now, to study the contemporary art as well. So before we move on to having these museums and modern art museums and that house these artworks, there's that missing step that we have to understand our past, the progression of it. And it's sort of like the role of institutions like AUB to educate future generations on that, as well as giving us the resources to further our research. Because like I said, we can't understand our past, we can't move on to our future unless we understand our past. And, sorry, you had...
No, absolutely, I agree with you. And you know, Lebanon is full of very talented people. And in fact, when you're abroad and something big happens, like, for example, the 2006 war, etc., the first, people that you hear from when you're abroad is the artists. You know, whether they're graphic designers, no matter what type of art they specialize in, these are the first people that you start, that they get you to feel the emotions where you are far away. So in your role now as a director of the Sfeir Semler gallery here, do you see, like, do you have a plan or like a particular role you wish to play to promote and help those artists in the region?
Absolutely. Even though I work in a very commercial side of the art world, our main purpose is to place these artworks, to place them in institutions where people can see, because our artists are storytellers. They work mostly with conceptual artists, and they reflect on the political events in the region, social events. They really do tell a story. So my education in AUB really enriched that. I am trying to tell their story. They don't have that ability to say it to so many people, but as a gallery who represents them, I do. And my education in AUB really enriched that, whether it's not just in the art history classes, but whether it's in philosophy, political science, and political history, and even in some cases, math and chemistry, honestly. Contemporary art goes out in all different directions. Yeah. It really does help. It really does help. So I really value my art history education in telling these artists' stories, in telling the story of Lebanon as well.
Thank you very much, Rana, for informing us about this. I would like to I would like to invite actually Steve to join us again here for concluding remarks for this panel. Thank you very much.
I think we need to thank our moderators and our panelists. They did a wonderful job. I think they've inspired us to understand that a life worth living and a degree worth awarding must involve the humanities. So thank you very much. We are going to take an intermission at this point. We have 10 minutes before the next panel set arrives. So please be efficient. We have 10 minutes because we have lots more coming. We're only halfway through.
That was great.
Welcome back. My name is Kamal Badr. I'm a fourth-generation AUBite, a physician who also happens to be the custodian of the medical education program at the Faculty of Medicine today, the oldest teaching program in medicine in the region, all of 150 years old as of this year, because the Faculty of Medicine was founded 1 year after the university was founded. So this year we're celebrating our 150th anniversary, and it promises to be just as a momentous a year as the past year has been. So this next session is on the impact of the humanities. And impact is a word that is very dear to us because it is also the title of our new curriculum in the Faculty of Medicine, the Impact Curriculum. A curriculum which has been in design for many years, starting in the days of Dean Cortaz, the help of Dr. Sabra and others. Finally, in our present administration, it came into fruition and became the official curriculum of the medical school in 2013. As you've heard from Elsa, who is a fantastic product of that curriculum, the curriculum includes now several concrete required modules on the art of medicine, on teaching a physician how to be a better perceptor of human nature and a better person, in addition to being a good scientist and understanding disease. Understanding the patient is what makes a good physician good. Understanding signs and symptoms. Even here in Beirut, the pharmacists prescribe whatever you want for those. So it's a particular pleasure to see the product of such a curriculum. And one of the things that we did also in order to allow individuals like Elsa to be here today is change the admission requirements so that it's no longer your core average in sciences that determines where you rank, but it is your how well you did in your own average, whatever in your own major, whatever your major is. And people complained and said, well, now people will start taking easy majors like philosophy, quote unquote, and psychology, and then get into medical school the back door. We said, well, no, these people, if they can do that and pass the science core courses, we want those people. We want a more diverse medical student body than just the top scientists. And as you see, we got them. So today, the panel or this part of the morning, the panel will focus on the impact of the humanities in society. And it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our panel, and particularly to introduce our moderators, Dr. Alain Shhadi, who is the interim dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Architecture, and Dr. Joshua Norton, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy.
Sammy, you've had a long and distinguished career. You worked for the World Bank for 24 years. You were the director for 6 years, the Middle East and North Africa for the IFC. You're the Minister of Economy and Trade here in Lebanon. And most importantly, in your long distinguished career, you're a graduate of AUB. A lot of these titles don't speak or bring to mind the humanities. But I know that the humanities has played a large role in your career and informing how it is that you did your job. Can you tell us what is the relationship between the humanities and the different aspects of the World Bank?
First of all, I'm very proud to be a product of AUB. AUB has championed liberal arts education for the past century and a half. And one of the unique things about AUB is that you are really in an international, multicultural, multi-ethnic environment, both on the student body and the faculty. And that makes really AUB a unique place now. when it comes to my career, I mean, being a product of AUB and appreciating humanities and having taken all sorts of courses, particularly cultural studies courses, it makes you a man or a woman of the world. It makes you better able to interact with others, to understand, where these others are coming from. So when I landed in Washington, D.C., in the World Bank Group as a young professional, this is how they used to call us at that time, it was also a multicultural, multidisciplinary environment, and I felt I was very well equipped to navigate in this world. And during my 24 years with the World Bank Group, I moved to different places. So we lived in Washington, D.C., we lived in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, we lived in Casablanca, we lived in Cairo, and it makes it much easier to move from one place to another, especially that my wife also is a product of AUB and similar backgrounds. So this has been extremely helpful.
Thank you.
As a modest government minister, you also have to interact with, Lebanon is part of the world. The world is getting smaller. So you have to interact with many other countries, trade agreements, with donors that try to help the country.
That's a very interesting segue, Sami, to Jihan. And good morning, everyone. I'd like to first of all apologize for my voice. Fadlo last night announced that AUB will be going tobacco-free, so I took the liberty to smoke my last few cigarettes before. But Jihan, you are a Palestinian poet, an accomplished one, an award-winning author, and you have been working for the better part of the last 10 years in Doctors Without Borders in countries that maybe people don't normally book for vacation in this particular time. Maybe there's another meaning and happiness to going there to do the kind of work that you've done. Sami has discussed, working with government agencies and with ministers and diplomats and so on, and you've been working kind of on the ground from the other end. How do you feel that you benefited from the training of getting a degree in English at AUB, and how has that helped you benefit others?
Thank you. And I'm very, very happy to be here also as an ex-AUB student. Actually, nothing prepared me for writing dispatches from hospitals in Afghanistan and Libya more than Samuel Beckett and Mahmoud Darwish. I don't think it's just a question of is art imitating life or is life imitating art. I think in many cases, art makes life easier to bear. I started in marketing. We heard all morning different stories of how people have stumbled into the humanities. I started in marketing and I was surprisingly good at it, even though accounting was never my strength and I was regularly psychologically disappointed in accounting classes. But then I decided to follow my heart and mind, and I decided to switch to literature. We live in countries where the track for careers is between doctor, engineer, and teacher. And for a long time, I struggled to explain to people what I plan to do with a bachelor's in literature and then with a master's in literature. And until today, so maybe not everybody knows, Doctors Without Borders or Médecins Sans Frontières was founded by doctors and journalists. So témoignage and communication and critical witnessing from the ground is a critical pillar of the organization's work. And it's on that track that I've been involved in for the last 8 years, recruiting teams, working, and now in charge of a regional office. This ability to read, write, analyze that we learn when we undertake the humanities is something that has been with me for throughout my career.
And Jihan, if I could go back to your training in English, Not only are you an aid worker or researcher, but you're also a poet. Can you tell us about that?
That's true. So by day, I run an office for communications for the region, and by night, I'm a published poet. And in fact, in a few months, I will go to Minorca to participate in a literary gathering that is honoring 60 years of the Nobel Literature Prize for Albert Camus. And I think this is a good example that illustrates the intersections, because the topic is going to be migration, home, and exile, which is a topic I've experienced from the ground, because I work with search and rescue teams in the Mediterranean. I've traveled through Serbia and all the path of people seeking exile. I interviewed doctors working in Syria. But at the same time, it's a literary gathering. And there, actually, I'm not sure if they invited me because I write or they invited me because I work with MSF. But it's one of those happy collisions.
It's fantastic. Aaron, you heard Jehan talking about writing and poetry, and you direct the Writing Center at AUB.
Yes.
I often send you my students so that you can help them with their writing, and we all agree that good communication is critical to negotiating the world today.
Right.
But I think AUB has a broader intention than only that skill. Could you speak to the fact that AUB prides itself in a liberal education, a liberal arts education? How does the practice of writing, does it have a more important role, let's say, in the world than only enabling communication? Is there another aspect to it?
Absolutely, yes. Writing is a tool, yes, to communicate, but it's also a tool to help us learn, to help us convey knowledge, to help us engage with one another. People learn about others and engage with others through writing. Every piece of writing has a target audience. And the Writing Center actually is kind of a unique space on campus that the 750 students who came last year learned that they can't just come in and hand us a piece of writing and get it edited and walk away with it. They have to sit down and have conversations with a tutor to have that real world audience in front of them, to really be able to think about the goals of what it is they're trying to say, to think about the needs of their audience and the expectations of the genres that they're writing in and the context that they're writing in. And that ability to assess that situation, to assess what they're doing, to assess the way they're being heard and seen and read, helps them, one, to communicate, but also to be able to analyze, to evaluate other writers, the way that other writers, other speakers respond to or are responded from. And that's something that's incredibly important today. Whether we're listening to teachers or to politicians or to the media, we have to be able to think critically and assess and engage in ways that are meaningful. I think students also learn how to connect and learn very difficult material through writing. Students often, I've seen, will write 2 and 3 pages where they're just writing in circles and circles and circles, and finally, at the very last paragraph, they have this really smart, fantastic, innovative, unique idea. And it's so exciting. Maybe not so much for the student who then has to go back and rework the whole paper, but it's exciting because they've finally grasped something that they were very close to understanding but couldn't quite catch. It helps them really make connections to what it is that they're learning, and that's what we at AUB are really hoping that our students will do. And third, I think writing serves as a way for a writer to examine and reflect on him or herself, their histories, their experiences. I think one of the images maybe that was shown before was one of our tutors. She was holding a sign that says, "So through my writing, I found myself buried in art," which I think is beautiful. And I think she was able, through writing, to be able to create her identity, recognize it, express it in a way that maybe she wouldn't have been able to. And in so doing, she was able to find her voice, to find her niche, which is what, again, we want our students to be able to do. And what I think AUB students even more than students that I've had teaching at other universities in the United States. They really here want to be able to engage. They want to find their voice, to be able to express themselves and become part of the conversation, a meaningful part of society. And so, yes, I think we would all agree that good writing is more than just having a grammatically perfect sentence, thankfully, that it does produce knowledge. It does help us to engage scientists, entrepreneurs, scholars, researchers. The way that knowledge is created and conveyed is through writing. And by reading what they've written, we then can build on that and engage with it and create more knowledge. But so I actually would like to turn the conversation over to Mohammed here, who is one of our Writing Center tutors, and he's also a junior in the history department, and I think he's going to speak some about the way he's created knowledge and found ways to engage here at AUB.
Thanks. Well, I believe that the critical thinking and writing skills that I picked up as a history major, have greatly influenced the way I work. Not just within my classroom, but also within other opportunities I've had, such as the Writing Center. And it's helped me cultivate the vision the Writing Center has for the AUB community and the community at large. And what I've learned is that history is not just memorizing dates and regurgitating it on paper, which is a common misconception we have here in Lebanon. I believe it's prepared me for so many different roles, may it be as a staff writer or an editor at the student newspaper, or through other opportunities I've had. For example, refugee healthcare research at my summer internship. I never thought that, as a freshman student, that history would be so influential on the way I work and I think. And it's a shame that parents don't understand how resourceful history is, or the humanities in general, how resourceful it is for someone's life and in their workplace. And unfortunately, this does prevent students from pursuing the field that they are most attracted to. And I know, this was my situation at one point, but ultimately I made the right decision, and it's paid off greatly. Thank you.
So Mohammed, you found yourself, did you struggle then in making this decision to major in history, and what are the sort of social pressures on you? I know we've heard about this a little bit from some of our earlier panelists, but can you tell us anything about your personal struggle with this?
Well, of course, in Lebanon, we have this misconception that, you have to pursue a professional career, in order to survive. But, the humanities in AUB, they just structure, they cultivate me in such a way that I can go and pursue many different fields without having to, major in engineering or business. And, I believe that, AUB does break down barriers when it comes to, debunking these myths about the humanities. And, I can't imagine, going through life without, what I've learned here.
Right, and so like your internship this summer, your background in the history, in history helped you to be able to perform well in this internship.
Yeah.
It gave you the resources.
Yeah, and like a field like as healthcare, like I assumed that there were two different things, but like what the humanities do is that they help you blend different things that you thought were like totally, mutually exclusive. Like
Wait a minute. What was your internship this summer?
At Islam Ferris Institute.
Okay.
It was refugee policy, and most of my work was on healthcare. But I just blended in flawlessly, and it gave me the history. Gave me the edge I needed at work.
Sammy, hearing, coming from a different perspective, we got a young student here who's describing this sort of cultural norm. It's hard to choose a major in the humanities. You are on the other side of things. You presumably have children and grandchildren. Can you speak about this norm that's in Lebanon and what your take on that norm is, being on this side of the sort of demographic?
Well, most parents in Lebanon attach a great importance to certain fields of study because they believe that these are better, they ensure a better financial future for their children, and most parents would like to see their children go into medicine, engineering, or business. I come from a medical family. There was a lot of pressure on me to pursue medical studies, but I bucked the trend. And when it came to me to listen to what my children wanted to do, I think I did not put pressure on them. And my son studied psychology, and he's a very successful executive producer in a major news organization. She studied fine arts, and she's also doing extremely well here in Lebanon as a freelance photographer. So, yes, there is a lot of pressure from our society, but you can also study other fields in the humanities in general and still be successful professionally and also financially. But I would like to add one thing. In this world that is becoming smaller and smaller and more interconnected, we are seeing, unfortunately, extremism flourish everywhere, in this region in particular and in other places. And I'm a strong believer in the fact that if you have a liberal arts background, you're more likely to understand where people are coming from. You are less likely to be extremist and prejudiced. And I think this is extremely important, and we can see what AUB has produced over the years.
So would you say that maybe an accurate way of summarizing some of that is, though some technical fields might produce certain sorts of incomes and wealth, personal wealth, that the humanities sets one up to produce wealth for the world, at least culturally?
The humanities make you a better person and a more rounded person and a better citizen of the world, to interact with people from different backgrounds and different disciplines now. And I mean, some people or most people are also successful professionally. Maybe the average engineer or lawyer or doctor makes more money, but
sure,
it doesn't mean that these people are happier.
Sure.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists today. As our next group of panelists come to the stage, I'd just like to call your attention to the video that you just saw. That was the band Mashra Layla. For those of you who aren't familiar, that was a band that was started here at AUB in 2008. They were actually students of engineering and architecture, I'm proud to say, given how much engineering has been bashed today. But I would also like to say that our engineering students are firmly ensconced in the liberal education that AUB provides, and that's really what gives us an edge over other engineering programs in the region. I would just like to say that Mashra Layla has been really progressively pushing the envelope in social and political issues through their music, and they've really broken just about every norm there is for a rock band in or for a popular band in Lebanon. I've heard them interviewed on multiple occasions, and they talk about that quite explicitly. They talk about getting their inspiration early on from the problems that youth in Beirut in particular face, so that many of the sounds and textures in their music really come from the lived experience of being in Beirut. And so speaking of engineering and speaking of pushing boundaries, I'd like to introduce our undergraduate student, Jumana Talhou. She's for 2 years, she studied in mechanical engineering in my home department before she defected to upper campus and is now a student in majoring in sociology and anthropology, and she has a minor degree in philosophy. Jumana, were we really that bad? No. But before you answer, let me just tell you here before this esteemed group of people that on behalf of my colleagues in the Faculty of Engineering and Architecture, we forgive you. I haven't yet spoken to your parents, so I'm not sure what they will say to me. But on a more serious note, Jumana, I have seen you. I've seen in you a fire to transform society through your activism, both on campus and off campus. What made you feel that you could best fuel that fire by going into the humanities?
Well, I think the best place to start would be to see why I changed my major in the first place. And it was really a change in worldview. So we as human beings take a lot of things for granted to be able to do our day-to-day activities. So you wake up, you brush your teeth, you go to work, and you don't question every morning why you have to brush your teeth, because that just slows things down a lot. And the same logic is applied in engineering. We take the laws of physics and mathematical theorems and we apply them to move forward and to build and to construct. And it makes sense. But when this logic is applied to a sociopolitical context, it appears how dangerous it can be to take things for granted. And this is what the humanities taught me. The humanities taught me that I have to deconstruct things to be able to move forward. And this was really the intellectual stimulus that made me change my major. And with it came a shift in consciousness. And so with it, I threw away the granted notion that one who is good in math and physics has to do engineering. And with it, I threw away the granted notion that this is how the political situation is, and so there's nothing that we can do about it. So I became also politically and socially active.
Speaking to another former student activist, Makram, in your years at AUB, you were two-time president of the USFC. And you were a notorious student activist. Jumana is well on her way to following in your shoes. I read with great interest your book, Campus at War, which documented the late 60s, early 70s, mid-70s of AUB and the student activism here. You hold a bachelor's and master's degree in history from AUB, and you've gone on to earn your doctorate. Do you think that studying humanities makes one more inclined to heed a calling? And to make a difference, to heed a calling to make a difference, and perhaps more broadly in the age of austerity that we live in, when public funding and support of education is under attack. Do you feel that an argument can be made that the humanities serve a public interest that should be invested in by the public, as opposed to what we've heard a lot of, which is the notion that it makes you a better individual? Does it also make a better society?
As you pointed out, I was labeled as a professional student. I'm someone your parents warn you not to deal with on campus because you might be distracted with student politics and you might not go to class. But I was a great student. I was a good student. I was on an honor list, and people did not believe this. I used to go to class for a number of reasons. First of all, I needed to graduate. Second, it's a good way to recruit people. But also, classes in history, you get to interact with your people around you, and they know you on the first name basis. So when you have an advisor, this advisor becomes your mentor and becomes your friend. And because the campus life and the campus is an incubator for social activism, you tend to become active without noticing this. So you become part of this legacy, which through writing of my book, I have realized that AUB has played a role in everything around us. The people who founded AUB were not as liberal as we assume, because in 1882, with the Darwin controversy, it was a big fight over evolution. So these people slowly but surely realized that the world around them was changing, and these students were forcing change, and the faculty actually were forcing change. I don't like to take student activism as a purely student-led movement. It's an interaction between the mentors, the faculty, and the students. And you are forced to take part like the founding fathers of the constitutional movement in the Arab world. So if you look at Ahmad al-Khatib in Kuwait, if you look at the Palestinian leaders, George Habash, Wadi Haddad, Hani al-Hindi, all these people played an instrumental role because campus life allowed them to grow and allowed them to become more active and to force change. And this is actually why I became interested in student activism. And this is why I believe, despite the brand that I got as a professional student, as a member of also a political party in the country. AUB makes you civilized, not just as a human being, but also as a political activist. You no longer bully your way through arguments, but you try to actually convince the other, and you try to recruit, because the sectarian power bases of the political parties are not enough on AUB campus to win elections. So you need to go outside the box and to try to talk to people, especially lower and upper campus dynamics, and to also understand what the faculty, because we tend to be, when I started as a sophomore, my only concern was to attack the administration. We used to call them the sultans of the fifth floor. I realized that the only way...
We still call them that, but...
The only way to actually do anything serious change or to reform, as we all try to do at the beginning of every year by these platforms which actually promise but never deliver, is to actually communicate and to actually send them official emails asking them for official demands, rather than communicating with them through the press or through these communiques which never actually become a reality.
Makram, you mentioned this idea how it wasn't just student activism, but the faculty played some sort of role in this activism. I'm going to ask Hani Hassan, one of our instructors in the CVSP department, as well as in philosophy. You're also the director of MEPI. We have two students on the stage, both with degrees in the humanities. And it begs the question, what does the faculty, not the people, but the discipline itself of the humanities, of philosophy, history, CVSP, which might lay the conceptual foundation which allows, this sort of civic engagement.
To address this, I guess the connection is, Josh, what you were trying to get to, is the connection between the humanities and civic engagement in some level, and of course the role of the faculty therein. And in a few words, I'd say that there's, in a sense, an organic, really, connection between the humanities and civic engagement. And if I'm to say a bit more about this organic nature I'm alluding to, I'm going to come at this from two directions. The one is, in some sense, my being here as a representative voice of the Civilization Studies program and faculty, and the other from, indeed, my involvement with the MEPI Tomorrow's Leaders Scholarship Program. So the Civilization Studies program, or the CS as perhaps more familiar to most people in this room, has been serving the mission and vision of AUB since the 1940s, and really kind of engaged in unwavering commitment to the liberal arts curriculum, right? And so what does that mean? The program offers courses, and through those courses offers students an encounter, first-hand encounter, with primary texts and sources from a wide range of epochs and cultures, right? So the diverse cultures covered, and an array of disciplines, literary, philosophic, scientific, and of course social sciences. And through that encounter, the program, very much again in line with the AUB mission statement, promotes and tries to kind of participate in the development of key values of lifelong learning, critical thinking, of course. But I think more pertinently, it participates in the development of respect for diversity. I think this is a key issue in these kind of programs. Essentially, the program emphasizes the centrality of empathy, right? I mean, through these encounters, the students are encouraged and indeed assisted in examining and re-examining not only life worlds and worldviews past and recent, but perhaps more importantly, their own life worlds and worldviews, and to reflect critically on these. In a manner of speaking, the program participates in nudging the students towards learning to fly without a safety net, as President Khoury so aptly described the learning experience at AUB. But I think more centrally, or equally important, it drives them towards being mindful and respectful of diversity and difference, but equally also of being critical evaluators of their own worldviews, right? And to my mind, these values are absolutely essential in cultivating civic-mindedness and translating that to civic engagement. And that's where, if you wish, my connection with the MEPI Tomorrow's Leaders Scholarship Program also informed that for me. I've been managing that program for almost 3 years now, working closely with promising, deserving, yet underserved young women and men from the MENA region, from Bahrain, Yemen, Egypt, Gaza, West Bank, Tunisia. And through my work and engagement with these students on that program, I think it's become very clear, Josh. I think it's become very clear to me the centrality and the importance, and I actually would say the urgency of imparting these humanistic values and instilling them, the humanistic values of tolerance and diversity and respect for diversity, and of course, critical thinking, precisely as we move towards a kind of more civically engaged student body on campus, and more pertinently, I think, off campus. And the further off campus we go, perhaps the better. So, to my mind, again, to just wrap it up briefly, there's an absolutely organic connection between the humanities and the kind of values that are instilled in the humanities and civic engagement. If I may just very briefly, for instance, over these 3 years, I've had the pleasure of having numerous discussions with the Tomorrow's Leaders scholars, and mostly reflecting kind of on the proverbial interesting times we live in this part of the world currently. And I think in none of those discussions do we sit back and ponder whether the situation is the way it is due to a lack of health and business professionals, or doctors, or engineers, or social scientists. But invariably we find ourselves pondering and, yes, lamenting the lack of the humanity and the humanistic values. So to my mind, the moment one says civic engagement, one cannot really say that without already kind of subsuming and assuming the values of the humanities, at least to my mind.
And can you give us briefly a snippet of what is the role of leadership in the MEPI program?
Well, so the MEPI Scholarship Program, which is a partnership between AUB and the Near East Affairs Office at the Department of State, it's really meant to offer a framework or grounding, or I would much rather the word space, an opportunity to develop and to help develop civic-minded young professionals and individuals who, after graduation, would go on to be leaders or take on leadership positions in their communities. And I have to say we already have up to 30 or 40 alumni, and I'm really, really proud of them. And, I'm not going to name, but you'll see one of them soon on stage. And, one of our alumni was actually in 2013 named by Forbes magazine in the top 100 influential young leaders of the world. So leadership beyond the walls, right? I mean, but of course, as Makram was saying, and I think it's come up earlier with numerous of our panelists, it starts here, and it starts, to my mind, intrinsically with the values of the humanities.
So if I could summarize one part is AUB provides sort of leaders, future leaders of tomorrow with a sort of humanitarian education so that they can go out beyond the walls of AUB, beyond the walls of Lebanon, to the surrounding region. In a particular time, as you said, it's an interesting time for us to affect presumably a flourishing future for the region.
Absolutely.
Now, Juman, I want to come back to you real quick. We talked a little bit about the basic values and principles which go in to providing a sort of attitude towards civic engagement. You also are involved in this. Can you tell us what your take on that question is?
Definitely. I think the humanities really do provide this space, and it's sort of the propeller for someone to become politically and socially or civically engaged. And this was actually our electoral campaign this year with the Secular Club, Change Starts from Campus. So the challenge is really, how do we take these values and these principles and spread them on campus and off campus? And this is what really drove most of us to be active this year and in the coming years, hopefully. And we're really trying to expand the walls, really, of what we can do and how we can communicate and who we can convince of our values and our purpose and what we want to do as students who have learned the importance of these values.
Thank you. You know, Makram, you were the prior generation of social activism. You're something like the current, going forward generation. And then, Herman, you are a professor of history and archaeology. What does history and archaeology have to do with social activism, especially in our current context, political context?
Well, basically, I think both history and archaeology are concerned with human identity. Nobody can deny that past events and the cultural background we actually carry around with us shape how we perceive ourselves as individuals, as societies, as states, as nations. So the value of understanding the past, I think, is already evident. This has become actually, in a very tragic way, quite important in the last few years. If you think of the destruction of Palmyra by ISIS in Syria, or the torching of the medieval libraries in Timbuktu by Boko Haram, this actually shows the power material culture or cultural heritage has. There are, let's say, certain organizations who actually perceive this cultural heritage as a threat. And of course, our role as historians and archaeologists is not only to investigate the cultural heritage, but to protect it. So the very important thing that we have to do is not only working on cultural heritage for our academic colleagues, for our academic peers, but to bring the value of the cultural heritage to the communities on the ground. So reaching out to, let's say, the non-academic population is a very, very important point, and that actually has been done too little in the past years. It's getting better. As an example, I just want to briefly mention my own fieldwork project in Kfar Abida on the north coast of Lebanon, where we've been excavating roughly 5,000-year-old urban site. When we started to work there in 2004, nobody in the community was really interested in what we were doing. But through a number of events, guided tours through the excavation, lectures in the community, television coverage, and so on, we got people interested, and now we actually have a very, very active group of people from Kfar Abida who are concerned with the protection of the site, who are making plans for the future of the site, and so on. And that's very gratifying to see how, let's say, the work that we do as academics is also, let's say, brought into the local communities.
I like this part where he said, you know, the work as an academic. Mm-hmm. Not only do we as professors in the humanities teach humanitarian concepts and help students relate to the world, provide and produce meaning, but as a profession, history and archaeology is participating in the sort of protection and flourishing of our cultures, and in a sense, engaging us civically, at least in this way, protecting our heritage.
Yes, I fully agree.
Well, please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. I'd like to invite you to speak.
انتهى به الأمر تحت السور. انتهى به الأمر تحت السور. كان تحت السور مقهى معروف التقت فيه مجموعة أدبية من كتاب تونس ومثقفيها زمن الاستعمار الفرنسي في ثلاثينات القرن العشرين. أما هو فقد انتهى به الأمر تحت سور غير سور كتاب زمن الاحتلال أو المبدعين. شتان ما بينه وبين هؤلاء، شتان بين من أهدى حياته للإبداع ومن تمخضته الحياة مأساة لم تحتج إلى مخيلة. شتان ما بين مقهاهم وسوره، فسوره اليوم سور جاهل غير مهذب، لا ينظر لسياسات ولا يرتجل شعرا ولا يرتاد ندوات أدبية ولا مجالس فنية. سوره اليوم هو سور العاجزين. يقولون إنه مجنون، إنه مجرم، إنه هارب من مصحة عقلية أو من العدالة. المهم أنه غريب، وفي قرابة 20 سنة في ذلك الحي سمع آلاف النظريات حتى كاد يؤمن بها من فرط التكرار. جيد أنه فكر منذ زمن في أن يدون حقيقته، وإلا ربما ضاعت منه هي كذلك. استقر على الرصيف في هذه الرقعة من الأرض منذ أكثر من 20 سنة، لا يبرحها ويقصدها كما يقصد البيت والمأوى. رأى في هذا الجدار شبه المهدم شبيهه فصار له توأما. هو جدار مشروخ ومتروك ومتهالك، ورغم ذلك صامد وعريق. رأى في الصرصور الفضولي المتجول خارج الجارور ليلا روحا صديقة فصار سمير لياليه. يمر على الشريد ناس لا يلقون السلام، ولكن الصرصور يحدثه دائما، يأتي إليه ويشاركه فتات خبزه المتيبس. يحمي الشريد هذا الصرصور الصديق من نظرات نعال المارة المستفزة. حرام أن يفنى بضربة نعل، فتاريخ الصرصور أطول من تاريخ البشرية وحضارته أبقى، وحين تنتهي الحضارات هذه ينتهون هم ويبقى هو.
That was Roa reading from her award-winning novel, The Memory of the Pavement. Roa is a graduate student in political studies at AUB. And while I was saying that, they snuck on the stage. Bilal is the chair of the Arabic and Near Eastern Studies, Near Eastern Languages department. Excuse me. I'll get that right. And Yasmin is a doctoral student in history at AUB. So.
Roa, you've written this beautiful novel, an award-winning novel, and you chose to use the language of Arabic, and I think you did this on purpose. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why you chose to do this? I mean, as beautiful as it was chosen for a particular reasons besides the sound and the beauty.
Absolutely. Actually, I'm fluent in 5 languages. And my own mother cannot read Arabic, so by choosing Arabic, I sort of subjected her to a lot of tears whenever she remembers that she could never read my work. I've chosen Arabic for 2 main reasons. The first is sort of intuitive, because the context sometimes obliges you to use a particular language when you're speaking to a particular audience. It's a sort of like dance. Whenever you hear a particular music, you dance to it in a particular way. But the second reason, and which I find most important, it's about how instrumental it is to use Arabic as a language for the creation of knowledge. And it is due to the politics of language, because language is not innocent. It is never innocent. Any sentence that we produce has hidden assumptions. It produces value. It produces political value, social value. So when I think of language and my choice of Arabic, I thought that I need to write in this particular language because usually the knowledge that we have and that we see as hegemonic, we seldom question who produced that knowledge, for which audience, in what language was that knowledge produced? Was it written by men? Was it written by the rich? Was it written by the rich man? Who writes history? History is written by the victors, obviously. So we have a knowledge that we label as the knowledge, which is hegemonic and usually associated with concrete sciences. And is this knowledge, is the knowledge superior in truth or in depth to the knowledge that we produce when we write creatively, when we write prose, when we write poems, when we create art? We were taught to trust numbers, for example, so I will illustrate with an instance that has actually happened. So if I am to undertake a research, say, and about the role of women in agriculture in a particular countryside, and I go to that countryside with my pen and paper and my quantitative question, because I was taught to trust numbers, and I ask women, do you participate in agriculture? And they tell me, A'udhu billah, working side by side with man on the field? No, like I'm a housewife. Okay, and I put a 0, then I ask the next woman, and the next woman, and the next woman. And I go back to my boss with my little sheet filled with zeros, And I think that I have created this knowledge that will remain and will be considered as the knowledge. Whereas, if I've been trained in humanities, and if I listen closely, perhaps this woman would share a story about how her spouse, when he brings the seeds from the field, she picks the seed that will be planted for next year. That's very instrumental in agriculture, that ensures its sustainability. So when you are trained in humanities, you understand how they are not mutually exclusive, how when you're producing knowledge, you need an alternative means of historicizing. You don't just need the history, the concrete history. You need to listen to stories, to art, to the songs, to the folk songs, to the untold stories of the subaltern in order to have a larger image of what's happening around you and of history. And this is particularly important for Arabic, because Arabic in general has been burdened with Orientalist representations. So if I have the privilege of using more than one language fluently, perhaps I should use my native, which is Arabic, and produce knowledge that is not Orientalist or that is not burdened with shallow research and shallow context of history. And to reiterate what I'm assuming everybody watched the movie called Dead Poet Society. Anyone? Yeah? Mm-hmm. So to reiterate that, there are the concrete sciences that sustain our lives. For example, medicine, etc. Physics, we need to understand it to be able to live. But there are the other sciences, and we shy out of calling them so, or the other arts that we live for. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
Bilal, Ru'a mentioned numbers. She mentioned Arabic. I've heard that you know something about both of those. You had an undergraduate degree and a bachelor's degree in mathematics before going on for an MA and PhD in Arabic or Arabic studies. What connects those two things? I mean, they seem very different to me, although Ru'a did a beautiful job just now of tying them together in some way.
I don't think thank you for the question. I don't think I'll be as eloquent as Ru'a as a novelist. But you know, each of us has a dark side, right? And a monster inside them. And I would say the monster in me was my major. It's pretty much the same story we've been hearing about since the morning. I was pushed to medicine. I've convinced my parents that I'm actually a pre-med student, though I never took a biology class. I did math. And it was fine, it was fine. I learned to see beauty in it. And I looked at it as an art, art of math. And mathematicians often make this point. But then it was towards the end of my degree, I took one elective. It was actually a requirement, an Arabic class. And I just found myself, I've always wanted to do this. And to me, I didn't think about the job. I didn't consult with anyone. I just wanted to be, just khalas, yani. That's it. It's not aib. I'm just going to do it. I look at my field also, and Arabists like to also talk about their fields as sciences as well. And there is much truth in this. So I say I search for beauty, and I find beauty in both math and Arabic, and I'm happy.
Earlier we had Hani on the stage, and we were talking about the resource that AUB is in terms of reaching beyond our borders. Arabic is a broadly spoken language. Can you talk a little bit about how the department sees Arabic locally within Beirut, but also more broadly, and what might be the outreach from the department itself?
Yeah, thank you, Joshua, for the question. We have to keep in mind that Arabic is one of the first established departments here at AUB, if not the first one, right? Our founding fathers, one of them was an Arabist, Nasif al-Yazji, and we're very proud of this. These scholars in these 150 years, they were the founders of the Nahda and beyond. I'm talking about Nasif al-Yazji, Yaqub Sarrouf, even Anis Khoury Maqdisi, even more recently, Ihsan Abbas, Wadad al-Qadi, Muhammad Yusuf Najib, Ramzi Ba'baki. The list goes on and on, right? So we've contributed, we've shaped, actually, Arabic as a language, as a modern language, but also we've shaped the field of Arabic studies, not only in Lebanon and the Arab world, but worldwide as well. And the contribution of the department happens at different levels, of course. There is the level of faculty and research, and in this we're very unique. This is actually what gives the Arabic department, it's a Department of Arabic and Near Eastern Languages, what gives it its special character, that we do our research in Arabic and in English. We value the tradition of philology and the textual tradition of text, which is highly, highly regarded in the Arab world and the Muslim world in general. But at the same time, and of course the field of classics, philology is very important worldwide. But at the same time, right, we are open to critical theory, modern methodologies, and somehow we connect what happens in Europe and North America with what happens in the Arab world, and we act as a bridge between these two different traditions that are hostile to each other. Right? So we become a platform of dialogue in that sense. Now, we have to also keep in mind that this is the Department of Arabic Studies in the Arab world, doing it in Arabic. So we, of course, in our research, we can borrow questions from the West, and we borrow questions from the East, but we also set our own questions and our own agenda, and we are the authority, and they have to follow, right? We don't have to follow them. So somehow we de-orientalize the field, but also we de-Westernize the field. Now, at the level of students, I would say, what is also special about AUB is that most students, if they have gone through the Lebanese system, they have to take an Arabic requirement. It's a communication skills class. And of course it is useful, it's always useful, it's an added value. I had students, for example, engineering students, architecture students, who tell me that they actually became better engineers because they took this Arabic class. Right? And this is counterintuitive somehow, but they get internships in Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, not because they're great engineers or great computer scientists. The world is plenty of these people. But because they actually know Arabic and can introduce Arabic into technology. You know, OCR, all sorts of programs, you know, all sorts of things. And I have plenty of examples about this. But Arabic is not only a tool, right? Any class that you take actually becomes a tool. Any language that you learn becomes a tool. I think what is most important is that we show the interconnectedness of the languages and cultures of this mosaic, the Middle East. Because we give classes in Syriac, Turkish, Persian, controversially Hebrew, for example, and we show the interconnectedness of all these languages and all these cultures. And this brings me to a very important point, and I think that the most important thing that the department does is that students can express themselves in Arabic, in their native language, and this is extremely important for their identity, for who they are, where they come from, and where they're heading. Right? So you just heard, for example, Ru'a expressing herself in Arabic. And students come to classes thinking, yeah, we want to learn, we love literature, we want to learn about Shakespeare, you name it. But then they take the Arabic class and we do have great authors in Arabic. You know, we have Jahiz, Ma'arri, Najib Mahfouz. We can actually be one, not only read about these things. So students write, publish, they explore themselves, they express themselves in their native language. And great authors, right, most great authors that I know about, they emphasize the importance of writing in one's own language. Right? And I think this is something that the department does very well. Now, also, and this is, I think, my last point, is service to our community. This is not the Department of Arabic in Florida State University. Right? This is the Department of Arabic in Beirut, in the heart of the Arab world. And recently, we've been talking a lot about this in the department, that we want to connect what happens in the department, the knowledge that we have in the department, the tradition, the legacy. Legacy is also a burden sometimes, with what happens in the city. So we've created this lecture series where we invite authors, not only prominent authors, but also aspiring and young novelists to discuss their books, to share their experiences in the department. And with time, I think we would like to be this comfort zone for the literatures in the city, in Lebanon, and in the region. We, of course, do this in collaboration with the English department and with the Center for Arts and Humanities.
Bilal, I could hear you, I could listen to you all day long, and I think many people here could too, but I would like to bring in Yasmin into this conversation. Yasmin, you're someone who's coming from a very practical background. No one could argue that you aren't. You've spent more than a decade in the UN system working on the most vexing problems of our region. And yet, you decided to come and do a PhD in history. What connects the practical world to studying history? And maybe you can relate it to the broader theme of the humanities in general, as Bilal did.
Wow, thank you, Alan. Being the last panelist of the final panel of the day, you have the disadvantage of speaking to an audience that's already been sitting here for the past 3 hours, but also the advantage of kind of reflecting on everyone that's spoken before. And one of the common questions that we constantly get, and this is something I've been able to experience firsthand in the field, is, are the humanities relevant to the everyday? And from my experience, I found in building my team and working with colleagues that when you are looking to hire people, yes, you are looking for people with a technical background. But in many cases, the technical knowledge, the practical knowledge you need on the job is, in many cases, it's actually learned on the job as you go along. But here's what I found out. The kind of skills that you get from the humanities education is not something, it's something that is extremely significant. We look for it all the time, and yet it is lacking. And it is the ability to look at a reality in front of you and to envision an alternative reality, to chart a different course of action, to see things not as they are, but as they should be or as they could be. And this is essentially also what history teaches you. You know that for any given historical moment, to be able to reconstruct this snapshot in history, you cannot look at one source, you cannot look at one group of people, you cannot look at one narrative. You need to be able to look at the social history, the cultural history, the intellectual history, economic history, the political history. You need to be able to understand how they governed. You need to be able to understand how women live their lives, how the families live their lives. So there is a multitude of layers, and you need to be able to engage in critical thought. We've heard Maximilian saying that one of his key takeaways was from the humanities is critical thought. Jumana and Rula talked about asking these questions. So you ask, why not? You ask, what if? And it's this ability to ask the right questions that we constantly look for. And this is what the humanities instills in you. And this is what is very difficult to find. And this is what we constantly need in the real world. And so in the UN, the thinkers and the doers, these are people that are the leaders of tomorrow. So these are people that will resolve a certain problem that you give to them by looking at different ways, by looking at these alternative narratives, by looking at different segments that may have been uncovered before, may have been ignored. And then you come up with these solutions. So there are also problem solvers. And so from my experience over the last decade or so, what I've found out is that these type of leaders, these type of doers, more often than not, are graduates of the humanities. And in history, it's particularly relevant. Dr. Gens talked about the value of understanding our past. But in addition to that, to be able to move beyond the academy, one of the most important things is humanities research. This generation of a body of knowledge that is very, very important for our region, for our countries, that helps to inform not just the global audience, but global policymakers, that helps to inform them, provide them with accurate information about different segments of societies that may not have been uncovered before, whether it's women, whether it's different groups of people, whether it's minorities. And the value of humanities research practically today, I think, cannot be emphasized enough.
Thank you, Yasmin. These things that you're saying about the practical importance of a humanities background in terms of being able to do the work at the UN well. It reminds me of things that Sami said at the very beginning. He's seen with his feet on the ground the importance of a humanities background and education and being able to do the service and the work at the World Bank. So here we're bookending this panel with two individuals who've had years of experience in big international organizations, both expressing something similar, the very ability to do these jobs well, being able to reach beyond particular cultures, understanding cultures, being able to come up with solutions to complex questions, being able to ask the right questions. We have evidence from both of you to this effect. Thank you for this, and I think the history department, the history and archaeology department, correct, is lucky to have you.
Thank you.
I also want to say thank you to the panel, and I'd like to call up Dr. Bedr to give us our last final and closing words.
Thank you all very much, and thank you all for staying and participating in this feast. I think if I was to end on one theme that permeated today's sessions, it is that the impact and the relevance of the humanities may not be as direct as an engineer building a bridge or a surgeon doing an appendectomy, but it makes everybody does whatever they do much, much better. And we are seeing that in all of the fields in which humanities are having an impact. So thank you. Thank you for the moderators and the speakers. And I'll leave the last word on this appropriately to Dean Sheikh.
I just want to end by thanking our students, our alumni, our faculty members, our deans, our associate dean, Sahar, Tamara, Karma Jarudi from my office, and Jennifer, who actually had to skip their Christmas break to make sure that this is happening. My last word really is for you, President Khouri, for you, members of the Board of Trustees, for you, Chairman of the Board of Trustees. The future of the humanities at AUB is in your hands. Thank you very much all for attending.